Well, we are now picking up where we've left off, and you know the principles and values to live by. We're turning this into, as you know, if you're here for the first time, though, there are 36 of these principles, 12 for each of, first of all, for pursuing God, and then 12 for the second category, pursuing godly character, and then the third character would be the category of the highest good of others. So it goes from God to self to others. Following that principle, loving God completely, ourselves correctly, and others compassionately. What begins with the love of God ends with the love of neighbor. So it's a reciprocal and powerful process that we have. So we're going here to these three because I do three each time. And so as a result, it's a 12-part series. This is part 8. So it's a kind of a grab bag because these principles normally I don't connect together. And so this forces me to integrate some ideas that I wouldn't have associated necessarily. And it's a creative way of doing that because when you creatively put things together you didn't really see before, it's very valuable. So here are the three. Be shaped by the word, not the world, is the first one. The second one is develop habits of holiness. And the third is live with 2 days on the calendar, today and that day, remembering that this is about pursuing godly character. So it has to do with who are you in this world. So knowing God, what impact does that have on you? So that you live with a growing integrity, that your claims and your credentials match more and more. They're never perfectly oriented, but you're moving in that direction where there's an overlap between your words and your works, your lips and your life, your character and your conduct. And so that you want to be a seamless tunic. And so being shaped by these principles makes a huge difference. So being shaped by the word is going to be the first one we'll look at. We all give our lives in exchange for something. That's a very important principle. You have no choice. This day, you will give an exchange for something. And whether it's going to be something of value or eternity or not, it will be invested or it'll be squandered. So every day is a gift and you'll never get it back again. So the question is, how well do I invest that? And that, of course, makes me think about this third one. Again, living with 2 days of my calendar. So they all go together in one way or another because having my mind oriented and set and fixed on the things above, the habits of holiness is also going to be a thing that enriches it. So let's just work our way through this. The first one then is giving our lives in exchange for something. So spend time on the things that God declares to be important. Because you see, wisdom is to treat things according to their true value, not their construed value by a fallen world system. And the world treasures trash and tells us to think of true value as toys or trinkets. We get it wrong. We put the wrong price tags on. And so we esteem or pursue the wrong things. So as we say then, any dead fish can float downstream, but we're called to swim against the current rather than allow ourselves to be seduced by the culture. But you know that you're going to be in this world, but how can you be in the world but not of it? How can you be clean in Corinth? And how can you be a person who doesn't just survive? You're not a survivalist. You are one who is called to thrive, even in tough conditions, as did Daniel and as did Joseph. So how do you flourish in Babylon? How do you flourish when you're in Egypt? You see the world system, but you're not grabbed or gripped by the world system, but because you have a different vision that's before your eyes, but you hold it presently before your eyes because it requires discipline and training and habituation to be a man who is going to be pursuing faith, hope, and love. It's not our natural bent. Our natural bent, as you well know, is autonomy. Having things in your way. You might put a spiritual veneer on it, but it's an autonomous life. And to live a life that is actually a life for others requires that you are secure enough in your identity to grasp who you are, and that you're secure enough to serve other people without having even it to be noticed. So that you become more and more, as you become Christ-like, you become more and more other-centered. So what begins with God, again, always ends with the love of neighbor. So let's talk about this a little bit more. This idea of we'll treasure and prioritize relationship with God over earthly possessions and status. So the Matthew 16:26 text helps us understand this. What will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? And it's a great question. What is your soul worth? What is your price? Do you have a price? Does your character have a price? Can you be bought off? You see, I remember this cynical movie that Karen and I saw when I was at Dallas Seminary. It was a dreadful film, The Magic Christian. Ringo Starr was in it, but it was a dreadful film. That didn't help the film. But the fact is that it was such a cynical view that they even had clerics who were compromising themselves just to get a few quid. It was just this notion here and what it would take. And it was a view, everybody's got a price. But you want to be a man who doesn't have a price. There are some things you will not do. And there are some things you can say, there's a boundary here, and I say no. So you have to forge your convictions in advance. And often it's during the times of many alternatives that you're called to forge your convictions so that they are there to help you in times of few alternatives. Because you see your own life, you're going to be times when things are moving and it's opening up for you, and then times where the world seems to constrict. Maybe you've noticed this. Good times and difficult times. But when you gain perspective and character and principles that carry you and that you are able to process during those times of more alternatives, that helps you then forge convictions that you'll cling to in the pain of few alternatives. And so he says, what will a profit? What will a man gain in exchange? The Son of Man is going to become, and then he will repay each man according to his deeds. So you have this very clear text then. That's also 1 John chapter 5, which is this great text about loving him more than the world again. Money, sex, and power. It's interesting. Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the boastful pride of life, is not from the Father, but it's from the world. He says the world is passing away and also its lusts. The one who does the will of God abides forever or lives forever. So he speaks about this whole concept then, the world, the flesh, and the devil, and the money, sex, and power, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the boastful pride of life, which were the very same three temptations that Jesus was tempted with in the garden. And they were the same three temptations that the first Adam was tempted with as well. And you can be pretty confident you're going to be hitting them all the time. And you know that's going to be, I'm not going to go into this, but money, mammon, wealth, finances, possession, the lust of the eyes, the sex, Aphrodite, the Plutus, the gods, Mammon and Eros, wealth versus lust. Finances, I had to come with an F, so I had fever, as opposed to fame. Finances, fever, and fame for the lust of the flesh, you see there. So you've got this whole quest for power. Money, sex, and power, though, become major pulls in our lives. And so it's always been so. It reminds me of Deuteronomy 17. And I was just listening to this text the other day as I'm working my way through the scriptures. I'm having a great time doing this, by the way, and it relates to the word versus world ratio, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But in that great text in Deuteronomy 17, there was a command when you find a king, this is 400 years before the kings, when you establish a king, Moses says, you're to make him from one of your own countrymen and give some certain conditions, but he's not to multiply three things: horses, wives, and silver and gold. Power, sex, and money. And it's interesting that Solomon was the greatest accumulator of all three. His attitude was, if a little is good, more is better. And too much is just right. So it's talking about wives. It's craziness, hundreds of them, and hundreds of concubines, porcupines, and that's what they became. But instead, that king was not to multiply these three things, and what they were to call to do is actually to be a man of the word and to write out a copy of the Mosaic law in their own hand. And they would study it every day of their life while they were king, so they'd be humble enough and godly enough to be able to bear the mantle of power with integrity. Because the more power you have, the more your integrity is going to be challenged. But he was also be a man under authority, because he was to write it out in the presence of the Levitical priest, which is an interesting thought. So that he is a man of accountability and a man of the word. Interestingly enough, virtually all the kings they were great at multiplying the wrong things. Not a one of them, to my knowledge, wrote out a copy of the law. You see, so it's a tragic thing. But again, it's this realism that I find in the scripture that really is so very clear, being shaped by the word and not by the world. And another thing that came to my mind about this was this word to word ratio we've talked about before. When I say the world system and its impact on our lives and its influence is being multiplied now, because it's now so ubiquitous, so pervasive that it's almost overwhelming. You have to choose again and again to say no. Otherwise it'll there be all the time. And the word, I don't mean just reading the word. I mean meditating or praying or being aware of God, practicing his presence. So that includes a whole array of things. And it includes also being aware of, instead of this world system, God's world, God's created world. So what's your ratio would be a good question to ask. In terms of my day, what's the proportion of the exposure that I'm allowing myself to receive from the world system, and how much am I being exposed to God's word and his truth? What's the relative proportion? We know this much, that it's a very critical thing in Philippians chapter 4, because remember, this wonderful text tells you not to be anxious, but to take all your anxious thoughts and give them up back to God, and keep on giving them back until they stay up there, until they're spring loaded to stay there. But it's also not thinking about the wrong things, but thinking about the right things. What are you going to replace it with? Because instead of extinction, you can't get rid of a thing you don't want by getting rid of it, can you? Any more than you can get rid of thinking about a pink elephant by trying not to think about a pink elephant. But instead, the way you do it is by thinking of a better thing. So when I hear some music I hate, and it's going to be bothering me for a long while, the only way I can get rid of it is to play something better. That's the music then I'll remember. You see the idea? Something better. Replace it with a better good rather than try to get rid of it itself. And the better good is the scriptures. So if I were to read Philippians 4:8 to you, and we've done this once before, I'm sure, but in Philippians chapter 4, verse 8, you see this text. Now I'm going to read the opposite of this. I'm going to read the news. This is what the news is, okay? I'm going to just reverse this. Finally, brethren, whatever is false, whatever is dishonorable, whatever it's wrong, whatever it's impure, whatever is ugly, whatever is of ill repute, if there any shoddiness and anything worthy of condemnation, dwell in these things. I just read the news. All I did was reverse Philippians 4:8. That ought to be suggestive. And I'm just saying, there's a proportion that I don't mean for you to be ignorant, but you don't need to granulate. And most men granulate far, far too much. So that where you have to ask yourself, brutally honest, where am I in my world to word ratio? And again, I don't mean just study of the Bible, but all kinds of sources. Where's my mind and the spirit and the flesh? Am I reinforcing certain aspects and attitudes? And so we are capable of doing that. And I'd like to see us move more and more toward where there's actually more of the world, or the word, than the world. It's a very rare person for whom that's the case. But I would want you to be one of those rare people. But a price is paid. But I promise you won't really say, gosh, I miss seeing the news. I need to find out more. It's an addiction after a while. And we become addicted to these things and these devices in serious ways. But another thing that I want to mention has to do with this movement of neuroplasticity as I describe it, because the idea of habits of holiness. How do you forge a habit? And neuroplasticity has to do with the fact that neurons that fire together, wire together. So certain behaviors then, when you repeat them, perfect practice makes perfect. Practice doesn't make perfect because you could practice in the wrong way. But if it's perfect practice, then you are training yourself to be more skillful and develop having habits of holiness. Unholy habits do nothing, you'll keep them. To get rid of to create good habits requires discipline and requires an endeavor in order for us to do that. So this whole idea of habituation has to do with not trying, but training. Not time, but intention. So what do I mean by that? I mean that it's more of a training than just trying, where you put yourself in a position where you are training yourself to set your mind on the things above and becoming more conscious about the times when you are not. You see, the more aware you are of your actions, because if this stuff is true, it matters. You see, again, as C.S. Lewis said, I don't know if it was in Mere Christianity. I don't think it was. Christianity is a statement which, if false, is of no importance, and if true, is of infinite importance. The one thing it cannot be is moderately important. Do you see where I'm going with that? Because if that's true, then this is a battle for your soul, your very being, your very identity, your very life, because you will become conformed by that to which you aspire. And that's why I always ask that question at the beginning of the day. What do you seek? What do you aspire to? What do you want for this day? What will you give your life in exchange for this very day? Because you will give it away, and it'll be invested or squandered. So it's intention. What do you want? What do you seek? And am I willing to pay the price of that discipline? Then the third area is living with 2 days on your calendar. And so the 2 days, of course, are today, which is all you've got, because you don't have yesterday, it's gone. Tomorrow, you don't know what it's going to be. It's theoretical. To live in the past, as Walker Percy puts it, to live in the past or in the future is easy. To live in the present is like threading a needle. It's hard to live in the present now. But the more you are conscious of the fact that this could well be your last day, think of it that way. Be realistic. And you've seen me do my somewhat morbid but perhaps helpful exercise with the Psalm 90. Instead of giving us 80 years, I'm going to give you 90 years. And if you knew for sure you're going to live for sure till 90 years, a lot of people would think, good, let's do the calculation here. How much do I have left? Good, I can think about it later, which is the dumbest thing you can do. You could put it off. But after a while, you habituate a lack of attention, and you're no longer drawn by the reality of the brevity of the sojourn, so you become foolish. Teach us to number our days. Why? You can't be wise if you think you have all the time in the world. You want to don't presume that you have that. Then that's why I then moved it from 9 to 90 days. That gets much more interesting. Because if you knew for sure you had only 90 days left, that would get you a little bit more focused, wouldn't it? I think as Samuel Johnson says, the thought of being hung in a fortnight marvelously clarifies the mind. If you knew your terminus date, and there is one, if you knew it was 2 weeks from now, how would you live now? This is the question. Why would we be so presumptuous and arrogant to suppose that you have 2 weeks? How do you know you have 2 days? If you're wise, you'll live as if this is your last day. And that's why I then jump it to 90 minutes. Now it gets very interesting, as we've seen before when I took you through this, because what's on your thoughts? What's in your heart? What's in your mind? You only have 90 minutes left. What's on your mind and thought? And if it's something other than Jesus as the focal attention of your thought, you're loving wrong. If it's your family, wrong answer. Because you were meant for infinity and eternity, and we know that the infinite word became the incarnate word, so to redeem us and draw us to himself. And the idea of him actually encompassing the infinite and the transcendent, the timelessness of God, the eternity of God. And that not only that, but the incarnate word becomes the indwelling word. So now you're indwelled by eternity and infinity. What's better than that? But most people regard that as just a kind of a tack on. Well, think about Jesus here and there. He is your very life. He is your very wellspring of being. If this is true, it's of infinite importance. The one thing it cannot be, as I said, quoted, was moderately important, but most people plump for moderately important. They compartmentalize it and make it a component of their life rather than the centrality of their lives, which is a terrible mistake. But then it gets even more interesting when you got 90 seconds. And you remember the fellow I was telling you about, who was the medic, who at first, when he saw that they had sudden doom, as he called it, sudden doom, which meant that they had less than 5 minutes. He could tell right away, you can, when you go to an accident scene. And he did not, when they said, "Am I dying?" Then they asked him that. He formally said, he lied to them. And he said, "Why would I lie to them?" So he stopped lying. "Yes, you are dying." I know I've shared this with you, but there were three things that came to mind that these people, once he started saying, "Yes, you are dying. You only have a few minutes." One was the question of forgiveness. Knowing they were out of time. There was unfinished business in their life. Forgiveness was one. Another issue that surfaced was that of meaning. And what was my life about? Is this all there is? And then the third one was a sense of being remembered. Being remembered, you see. There's something, all three relate to relationship. They relate to some kind of the currency of heaven is people, it's relationships. And that's really what life is about. So if you love your family more than you love Jesus, you're loving them less than if you love Jesus more than your family. It's not that he's the enemy of your love. He is the animator, but he will brook no rival. He will not want another to take his place. So as you love him more, then your capacity to love others is only enhanced and increased. So this becomes an important theme. So as I got to thinking about this, where are you in this scale? How do you know? Some of this is pretty obvious. We were pretty far down the road, but remember that phrase that I like so much: age conspires with God to transfer our hope from the temporal to the eternal. Because you get hit by things you didn't plan on. You have this atrophy and stenosis and desiccation. You're becoming like a mummy when you get a certain age. It's a depressing thing to see. It's not pretty. Old age isn't for sissies, as it said. The fact is, though, it's a reminder. It's a physical reminder of our mortality. It's a negative sacrament because it's an outward invisible sign of an inward and invisible disgrace. The disgrace of the fall, being part of that, away from God in Adam. Now, though, we have the grace of God that is going to transcend this life, so that even though our outward man is perishing, what does Paul say? Our inner man is being renewed day by day. For momentary, light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory, far beyond all comparison, while we do not look at the things that are seen, but the things that are unseen, because the things that are seen are temporal, but the things that are unseen are eternal. So where are you? Wouldn't it be prudent to live as if this is where you are, right here, the world's last night? How do you know it isn't? And if you did live that, would you regret it? If you lived as if you're going to see Jesus tonight, do you think you'd have any regrets? You know the answer. We will regret it when we don't live that way. So we know we're going home. We have our homecoming. We all have a date. Only God knows what that date is. But you'd be wise to live it with that in mind. And that's really what I wanted you to see here as we go back and process this together. So given all this, I'm going to hold these three up here for you and show them up here and see which one speaks to your table, or two speaks to your table, or maybe how can you connect them together? What were your thoughts today? You have yeah.
My question was, while you were talking, You said men granulate.
Yes, they granulate.
What do
on
you
the
mean by
news.
that?
They get so down to the nitty gritties and the details that they need to know more and more about a thing, about a news story. I get the gist of it. I pretty much can tell what's happening in our culture, and I talk about that to some degree. But getting granular is the deal where you just have to know more and feed yourself on it, where it becomes maybe you're almost feeling like you're a psychic voyeur. You're getting you're almost feeding off of people's pain and displeasure, and it's a chaotic world. And so after a while, it'll make you more paranoid, and you get so gripped with that fear that your word to world ratio is such that there's very little word and a lot of world. And the more you do that, a lot of worry and a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety comes in, and you begin to wring your hands in despair and you begin to curse the darkness. And what is my desire for you? To choose the way of gratitude, to choose the way of joy, to choose the way of contentment. Those are choices, they're not emotions. And you must choose that way because you set your mind on things above where Christ is. That's where you're seated with him. So you dwell with him so that you are indwelling two worlds. I live in two worlds simultaneously. So I'm living in the world to come, but I'm also in this present darkness. But the more I grasp that, the more I see I'm an agent. I'm a kind of a subversive agent in a darkening culture. But I'm at the same time, instead of using the weapons of darkness, I use the weapons of light and the word of God and the armor of the Spirit. So you have all those resources, but you know you're in a warfare. It's just a question of how you're going to fight, what tools and what weapons you're going to use. But if you don't want to use the weapons of the flesh, you want to use the weapons of the Spirit. And that to me makes a huge difference. So that's what I mean by that. You get so focused on this, it gets so much a part of you that you're teasing it out, and you just love to do this. And there are a lot of whole TV shows that are based on psychic voyeurism, a whole series of shows about judges, for example. I went in there and Karen was looking at one of these crazy shows, goofy situations. It's like reality TV, which is nothing to do with reality. It's all set up and interviews and everything done in advance as if it was in real time. Crazy stuff that people feed on. It's just not healthy. It's like eating pudding all day long. Just fill yourself all day long with tapioca or some other rice pudding or what. All day long, how are you going to feel? You see, and after a while, you're complaining because, gosh, I'm putting on weight and I don't feel good. Maybe there's something you can do about that. Maybe your diet might be deficient. You see, maybe your habits aren't so great. Maybe you got sloppy in the aesthetics of your spirit, because that's what happens. We often erode in the aesthetics of our spirit, and there's a diminishment, a gradual, it's slow. We hardly notice it. So that's why it becomes so seductive, because it's small. And by small increments, we can diminish ourselves and rationalize that diminishment. Again, that idea, a little, says the sluggard. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. But he doesn't say a lot, does he? But a little, and thus we deceive ourselves by the smallness of our surrenders is a phrase I love. It was Derek Kidner in his book on the Proverbs. But what a brilliant insight! This tragic comic figure, the sluggard. He's too lazy to even put his hand back in his mouth. There's a lion in the square, and after all, maybe that's his excuse for not going out. Maybe there is one. He starts beginning to believe his lie. He becomes actually so corrupted in the aesthetics of his spirit that he's not a person worth being around. You see, and then the corruption that produces, we become accustomed to compromise. You just look around passively and you see TV shows that are radically different than they were, or series now that have changed. There was a series that Karen we were looking at Bleak House, and it was a show that, in fact, if it was done now, they would put various F-bombs in Dickens, you see, as things that never would have even come to their minds, as if they're trying to actually normalize our distorted narratives that are so impure and so corrupt, but by gradual attainment, they can begin to move it in just bit by bit. It's a gradual accretion that and people suddenly and slowly collectively compromise, and they have a cultural and collective diminishment that takes place. I will stop whining. What's your next thought?
Ken, as a recovering news junkie here,
Recovering news
junkie. As you were talking, it made me think about something. The world, if we're focused on the world, we get into worry. And going back to what you've taught us before on the macro and the micro side of things, so the world gives us to worry, and the word gives us to wonder. So because we wonder about that, that was the thought I had.
Yes, that's a good word. This is why I'm trying my best. Not trying my best. I'm actually training. I'm training, not trying. I'm using the wrong language. You see, I have to be careful. One finger I point to you, and three are pointing back to me. You see, but I'm training. And I'm training to see the world as more and more as God sees it, and treasure things accordingly, and to treat them according to their real value. Then I begin to realize that what are the things that are most wondrous? How does God approach us? He approaches us, even though it's a fallen world, through beauty. But most men, as you've heard me say multiple times, don't cultivate the seeing eye or the hearing ear. But you need to train yourself to notice the beauty in which you're immersed, because you can use nature as a force multiplier for awe, for wonder, for worship, but we rarely do. So if I establish that, so when I'm driving, I'm listening to the scriptures all the time now, and as I'm doing so, I'm hearing this.
The trees decided to anoint a king over themselves.
That was a good one. But that's in Judges 9. But as I hear the scripture and as I look at beauty, I'm combining the two together. Give it a go. There's no harm in doing that. Try doing that instead of what we often do, is just either just go off into a la-la state or something like that. But try intentionally when you're driving or when you're going for a walk, make it a beauty walk. You're looking for beauty and a sense of awe. So train yourself to be aware of God's beauty in the created order everywhere and wonder, but also to be a man of the word, where it becomes a part of you, so that you carry it with you. And the more the word is in you, the more then it'll be infused through you, and the more it'll give you security and clarity of thought. That's another question, another observation. We have how much time left? We have maybe one more.
Pardon me for standing up, but I can't hear very well, and I can see your reaction better by standing. A question came up in our minds over here, or at least in mine, and it has to do with if we are on a pilgrimage here on this earth, and Jesus has forgiven us of our sins, what is the purpose of our pilgrimage?
The purpose of our pilgrimage is to become more and more in your practice who you already are in the heavenly places. You're in a soul-forming world. So as a pilgrim, then, you're here for a short season to become more in your thoughts, your emotions, your will, your desires, your choices, your aspirations, your longings, more and more who you already are as a perfect being in the Father's house, so that you're here then to become who you are. You see, you're already you're a spiritual being, but you're in a soul-forming world. You're an amphibious being. You have one foot in heaven, the other on earth. But to train yourself to live in two worlds simultaneously is no easy task. Because you see, that's why the brevity of the sojourn. I'm so old now, I can see the thing. You see, it's like one friend put it, you hear it's on the other, it's over the hill. But now I'm old enough, I can see the darn thing. You see, I can see the grave. So, that's actually a healthy thing. It's a memento mori. We've talked about this. Remember, you're going to die, and to remember that is wisely. That's why having 2 days in your calendar. So the more you become accustomed to that, you realize you are being trained by God in this world to become now. His desire is to complete you perfectly, spirit and soul and body. Already in your spirit, You are holy before God, and you're seated, you're perfect, and you're in his household, seated at the right hand. But in your soul, and then in your body is the third, and that'll be the resurrected body. So we will be complete, inside and out. And wait till you see each other in your resurrected wonder. Wait till you see that. It'll be beyond your imagination.